The whispered words cut through the Montana air like a blade. "No one loves a fat girl, sir, but I can cook." Grace Thompson's hands trembled as she stirred the stew at Murphy's Diner, the only eating establishment in the dusty frontier town of Cedar Ridge. Just moments before, she'd overheard those cruel words from a group of men outside, their laughter echoing off the wooden storefronts. But what happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. The diner's door swung open with a bang, and in walked Jacob Anderson himself, the town's most eligible rancher, the man every unmarried woman secretly hoped would notice her. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched him join the very same group that had been mocking her appearance. When Jacob's deep laughter mixed with theirs, something inside Grace cracked like a dried bone. She ducked behind the kitchen partition, pressing her back against the rough wooden wall. The smell of sage and beef broth filled her nostrils, but all she could taste was the bitter sting of humiliation. Grace had always found refuge in cooking. Her hands could work magic with flour and spices even when her heart was breaking. Little did she know that this moment of deepest shame would soon become the catalyst for everything that followed. "Grace, you all right back there?" called Murphy, the diner's gruff owner. "Fine," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. She returned to her station, channeling every ounce of pain into perfecting the evening's meal. Each chop of the knife was deliberate, each seasoning measured with the precision of someone who had learned to find worth in what she could create rather than how she looked. The men's voices carried from the main room. "That Anderson boy's been struggling since his Mary passed," one of them said. "Can't keep a cook on that ranch to save his life. Goes through him faster than a wildfire through dry grass." Grace's hand stilled on the wooden spoon. A cook. Jacob Anderson needed a cook. "Heard he's desperate enough to hire just about anyone," another voice chimed in. "Poor fool can't even boil water without burning it." The irony wasn't lost on Grace. The same man who'd laughed at her expense was struggling with the very thing she excelled at. She stirred the stew with renewed purpose, her mind racing. This decision would change everything, though she couldn't have known it yet. As the evening wore on, Grace found herself wiping down tables with unusual intensity. Each circular motion of the rag seemed to polish away her earlier tears, replacing them with something harder, more determined. When old Pete Morrison shuffled up to the counter, his weathered face creased with what might have been sympathy, Grace held her breath. "Grace, honey," Pete said, lowering his voice, "I don't mean to meddle, but I heard Anderson's been asking around town about hiring kitchen help. Good pay, too. Room and board included." Her pulse quickened. "Is that so? Now, I ain't saying you should consider it," Pete continued, glancing around to make sure Murphy wasn't listening. "But your cooking's the finest this side of the Continental Divide. Shame to waste talent like yours in this cramped kitchen when you could be running a proper ranch cookhouse." Grace nodded slowly, her mind already made up. She'd heard enough whispered conversations about Jacob Anderson's struggles to know the opportunity was real. But the real shock was still coming. She was actually going to do something about it. That night, after Murphy locked up the diner, Grace walked the moonlit streets of Cedar Ridge with purpose in her step. The Anderson Ranch sat just outside town, its sprawling wooden buildings silhouetted against the star-filled Montana sky. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain it could be heard 3 counties over. She'd changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton that her grandmother had sewn years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed, and it made her feel like she could face whatever came next. The walk to the ranch felt both endless and far too short. Before she could lose her nerve, Grace raised her hand and knocked firmly on Jacob Anderson's front door. The sound echoed in the still night air, and for a moment, she wondered if he was even home. Then footsteps approached from inside, heavy boots against wooden floors. The door creaked open, and there stood Jacob Anderson himself, lamplight casting shadows across his surprised face. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of Grace Thompson standing on his doorstep, her chin raised with quiet determination, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. "Miss Thompson." Jacob's voice carried a note of confusion mixed with something else. something that made Grace's stomach flutter with nervous anticipation. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and the weight of everything that had brought her to this moment. Jacob's weathered face contorts with confusion as he takes in Grace's determined stance on his porch. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the wooden planks, and for a moment, neither speaks. Grace clutches her worn leather satchel tighter, the one containing her prized recipes and the small jar of her special spice blend. "Miss Thompson," Jacob finally manages, his voice uncertain. I didn't expect." "You need a cook," Grace interrupts, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I can cook better than anyone in this territory, and we both know it." Jacob's eyes dart past her toward the main road, as if checking who might be watching this exchange. The memory of the morning's cruel laughter seems to hang between them like a heavy curtain. Grace notices his discomfort and feels that familiar sting of rejection beginning to build. But something has changed in her since standing in that dusty street. The humiliation has crystallized into something harder, more purposeful. "I heard about your troubles with the ranch hands," she continues, stepping closer. "Word is they're threatening to quit over the food situation. Can't say I blame them. Sam Porter couldn't cook a decent meal if his life depended on it." Jacob's jaw tightens. "How did you?" "This is a small town, Mr. Anderson. People talk." Grace opens her satchel and pulls out a small wrapped bundle. "This is my apple butter bread. Made it fresh this morning before." She pauses, the memory of the morning's events threatening to break her composure. "Before I heard you might need help." The aroma hits Jacob immediately: warm cinnamon, brown sugar, and something indefinably comforting that makes his stomach clench with hunger. He hasn't eaten a proper meal in weeks. Not since his last cook stormed off after the ranch hands complained about everything from burnt coffee to rock-hard biscuits. "Miss Thompson, I should be honest with you," Jacob begins, but Grace holds up her hand. "Let me be honest with you first, Mr. Anderson. I know what you think of me, what this whole town thinks. But I also know you're desperate, and I'm the best cook within 50 miles of here." What Jacob doesn't expect is the fire in her eyes, not anger, but determination so fierce it makes him reconsider everything he thought he knew about Grace Thompson. Here stands a woman who has clearly made a decision, and nothing will sway her from it. Meanwhile, across town at the general store, Grace's closest friend Eliza Reynolds sorts through the latest shipment of supplies, while keeping one ear tuned to the conversations around her. She's always been the keeper of town secrets, and today the whispers are particularly interesting. "That Anderson boy's in deeper trouble than most folks know," old Martha Clement confides to her daughter near the fabric counter. "Ever since his Sarah passed, seems like everything's falling apart out there." Eliza's hands still on the bolt of cotton she's measuring. She's heard the rumors about Jacob's late wife, but Martha's tone suggests there's more to the story than simple grief. "What kind of trouble?" Martha's daughter asks. "The kind that comes from guilt," Martha whispers. "Some say Sarah's death wasn't the accident everyone thinks it was." Back at the ranch, Jacob finds himself actually considering Grace's proposal. The woman standing before him bears little resemblance to the timid figure he glimpsed in town. There's steel in her spine now, and something about her presence feels right. "The position pays $15 a month, plus room and board," he says slowly. "You'd have your own cabin behind the main house. Meals for 12 ranch hands, 3 times a day. $20. Grace counters immediately. "And I choose my own supplies. No interference with my methods." Jacob's eyebrows rise. $20 is more than I pay my foreman. Your foreman can't turn salt pork and beans into something that'll keep grown men from walking off your property. Grace's confidence surprises even herself. "Those hands of yours aren't just hungry, Mr. Anderson. They're demoralized. Good food changes everything." Something in her tone makes Jacob study her face more carefully. Behind the determined exterior, he catches glimpses of vulnerability that tug at something deep in his chest. This woman has been hurt, probably more than most people know, yet here she stands offering to help him. All right, he says finally. $20. You start tomorrow. Grace nods curtly, but inside, her heart is racing. I'll need to collect my things. I can be here by dawn. As Jacob watches her walk away, her head held high despite the whispers that follow her down the main street, he wonders if he's just made the smartest decision of his life, or the biggest mistake. That evening, as Grace packs her meager belongings by lamplight, a soft knock comes at her door. She opens it to find young Billy Watson, the postmaster's son, holding an envelope. "This came for you on the evening stage, Miss Thompson," he says, looking puzzled. "Strange thing is, there's no return address." Grace takes the envelope with trembling fingers. The paper is expensive, cream-colored, and her name is written in an elegant script she doesn't recognize. She waits until Billy disappears into the darkness before opening it. Inside, on matching cream paper, is a single sentence written in the same careful hand. "Some secrets are better left buried, especially those involving Jacob Anderson's wife." Grace's hands moved with newfound purpose as she unpacked her supplies in Jacob's kitchen. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating her determination. She had accepted the position, but that mysterious letter still burned in her memory. "Stop cooking for him, or you'll regret it." "Morning, Miss Thompson." Jacob's voice carried warmth as he entered the kitchen, his workers trailing behind him. "Boys, this is Grace. She'll be handling our meals from now on." The ranch hands exchanged glances, their weathered faces skeptical. One man, tall and grizzled, stepped forward. "No offense, ma'am, but we ain't had a decent meal in months. Hope you're up for the challenge." Grace smiled, rolling up her sleeves. "Gentlemen, by evening you'll be fighting over seconds." As she began preparing breakfast, the rich aroma of bacon and fresh biscuits filled the air. The men's conversations gradually shifted from doubt to curiosity, then to outright anticipation. Grace moved through the kitchen like a symphony conductor, every motion deliberate and graceful. "Haven't smelled cooking like this since." Jacob paused, his voice catching. "Since your wife passed," Grace said gently, not looking up from the stove. Jacob nodded, his jaw tightening. For the first time in months, something resembling peace settled over his features as he watched Grace work. But that peace shattered when shouting erupted from outside. "Fire! Fire in the wheat field!" Grace's blood ran cold as she saw smoke billowing across the horizon. The mysterious letter's warning echoed in her mind. This was no accident. "All hands!" Jacob shouted, racing toward the door. "Grace, stay. I'm coming with you," she declared, grabbing buckets from the kitchen. They ran toward the flames together, the acrid smoke stinging their eyes. Ranch hands formed bucket brigades while Jacob and his foreman directed the effort. Grace worked alongside them, her dress soaked with sweat and soot, her earlier vulnerability replaced by fierce determination. "There!" one of the workers shouted, pointing toward a figure disappearing beyond the ridge. "Someone's running." The fire took 3 hours to contain, leaving a blackened scar across Jacob's best wheat field. As the last embers died, Grace noticed Jacob's shoulders sagging with the weight of loss. "We'll recover from this," she said firmly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Jacob looked at her with something between gratitude and amazement. "You didn't run when things got dangerous." "This is my home now too," Grace replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Back at the ranch house, they gathered in Jacob's study to assess the damage. Grace retrieved the mysterious letter from her apron pocket, her hands trembling slightly. "This came yesterday," she said, unfolding the paper. "I thought it was just cruel gossip, but now." Jacob read the words aloud. "Stop cooking for him, or you'll regret it." His face darkened with recognition and anger. "You know who sent this," Grace observed, watching his expression carefully. "Tom Grady," Jacob said grimly. "Former ranch hand I had to let go last month for drinking and causing trouble. But Grace, if he's willing to burn crops." He looked up, his eyes filled with concern. "This is bigger than just harassment." He's trying to destroy everything I've built. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The letter wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of war. The flames still smoldered in the distance as Grace clutched the mysterious letter, her hands trembling not from fear but from fury. Jacob stood beside her, his jaw set in grim determination as they both stared at the charred remains of what should have been prime grazing land. "Someone's been watching us?" Grace whispered, rereading the warning that had arrived just hours before the fire. They knew exactly when to strike. Jacob's eyes swept the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. "We need to find out who's behind this before they strike again. The Community Harvest Festival is in 3 days, Grace. If we can't pull it off." He didn't need to finish. They both knew the ranch's debts would consume everything he'd worked for. Grace straightened, feeling something shift inside her chest. The woman who had whispered about her worth in the diner kitchen was gone, replaced by someone who refused to back down. "Then we make sure it happens. But first, we find our saboteur." They spent the next day quietly investigating, asking careful questions around town. Grace noticed how differently people looked at her now, not with pity or mockery, but with something approaching respect. Word had spread about her cooking, about how the ranch hands had started singing at meals again, about Jacob's smile returning for the first time since his wife's death. But what struck Grace most was watching Jacob work alongside her. When old Mrs. Henderson made a snide comment about that heavy girl thinking she can save a ranch, Jacob's response was swift and cutting. "That woman has more courage and skill than half this town combined," he'd said, his voice carrying across the general store. Any man would be lucky to earn her respect. That evening, as Grace prepared what she secretly planned as a test run for the festival feast, footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Jacob appeared in the kitchen doorway, but his expression was troubled. "I found something," he said quietly. "Boot prints near where the fire started. They match ones I've been seeing around the property for weeks." Grace set down her wooden spoon. "You think you know who it is?" Before Jacob could answer, a shadow moved past the window. Then another. Grace's heart hammered as Jacob motioned for silence, moving toward the rifle mounted above the fireplace. The back door creaked open, and Tom Grady stepped inside, his clothes still reeking of smoke. Behind him came 2 other men Grace recognized from town drifters who'd been asking too many questions about the ranch's finances. Well, Tom drawled, his eyes cold as winter stone. "The fat cook and the grieving widower, playing detective." Jacob raised the rifle, but Tom just laughed. "Put that down, Anderson. We're not here to hurt anyone tonight. Just came to deliver a message." "What kind of message?" Grace demanded, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Tom's gaze shifted to her, and something ugly flickered in his expression. "The kind that says some people don't belong where they don't fit. You think cooking a few meals makes you worthy of standing beside a man like Jacob? You think this town will ever really accept you?" The words should have cut deep, but Grace felt only a burning anger. "I think you're scared that they already have." Tom's face darkened. "You want to know why I really hate this place? Why I want to see it burn?" He turned to Jacob. "Ask your precious cook here what she knows about your dear departed wife, Anderson. Ask her what her friend Eliza really told her about Sarah's accident." Grace's blood turned to ice. She glanced at Jacob, seeing confusion and growing alarm in his eyes. "Sarah didn't die in any accident," Tom continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "She was murdered, and the man who killed her, he's been watching this ranch for months, waiting for the right moment to finish what he started." The rifle trembled in Jacob's hands. "You're lying." Tom shook his head slowly. "Am I? Because he's not working alone anymore, Anderson. And tomorrow night, during your little festival, when half the county's gathered here." He smiled, and it was the most chilling thing Grace had ever seen. "Well, let's just say you'll finally get to join your wife." Before either Grace or Jacob could react, Tom and his companions backed toward the door. "Sleep tight," Tom called out as they disappeared into the darkness. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day. The morning of the community event arrives with golden sunlight streaming across the ranch, and Grace stands in the kitchen before dawn, her hands steady as she prepares what might be the most important meal of her life. The entire town will be here today, and with them, the chance to save Jacob's ranch from financial ruin. But more than that, this feast represents everything she has become. No longer the woman who whispered in shame, but someone who has found her true power. The kitchen fills with the aroma of roasted beef, fresh bread, and her grandmother's secret apple pie recipe as Grace orchestrates a meal that would feed 200 people. Her movements are confident, purposeful, each dish a testament to the strength she never knew she possessed. When Jacob enters, still bearing the worry lines from their confrontation with Tom Grady, his eyes widen at the spread before him. "Grace, this is..." He begins, but she silences him with a gentle smile. "This is what I do, Jacob. This is who I am." As the townspeople arrive, Grace watches from the kitchen window as skeptical faces gradually transform into expressions of wonder. The mayor, who once questioned her presence at the ranch, returns for a third helping of her cornbread. Children who had giggled at her appearance now beg their mothers to ask for her cookie recipe. The transformation is more than she ever dared hope for. But the true test comes when Tom Grady appears at the edge of the gathering, accompanied by 2 other men, the others he had warned about. Grace's heart pounds as she recognizes them as creditors who have come to claim the ranch if today's fundraising falls short. She watches Jacob's jaw tighten as he spots them, and without hesitation, she steps out of the kitchen and into the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grace calls out, her voice carrying across the yard with newfound authority. "Before we finish this wonderful meal, I want you to know something about the man who owns this ranch." The crowd quiets, and Jacob looks at her with surprise and concern. Grace continues, her words flowing with the same confidence she brings to her cooking. She tells them about Jacob's kindness to his workers, his determination to keep the ranch running despite his grief, and his unwavering integrity in the face of sabotage attempts. "Some of you have questioned why he hired me," she says, her voice never wavering. "You've whispered about the fat woman who dared to work alongside your respected rancher. But let me tell you what I've learned. Strength comes in many forms. Love grows in unexpected places. And sometimes the very qualities others mock become the ones that save the day." The crowd listens intently as she reveals Tom's sabotage plot and his attempts to drive them apart. When she finishes, the silence stretches for a heartbeat before erupting into applause. The mayor stands and declares that the community will not only meet but exceed the fundraising goal needed to save the ranch. Tom and his associates retreat, their plans crumbling in the face of united community support. As evening falls and the last guests depart, Jacob finds Grace cleaning dishes in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. "Grace," he says, and she turns to face him. In his hands, he holds the deed to the ranch, now secure thanks to the day's success. "I have something to ask you." She sets down her dish towel, seeing something new in his eyes. Not gratitude or friendship, but something deeper and more precious. "Stay," he says simply. "Not as my cook, but as my partner. In everything." Grace feels tears she didn't expect welling in her eyes. The woman who once whispered in shame about her worth now stands before a man who sees her completely. Her strength, her talent, her beauty that extends far beyond physical appearance. "Yes," she whispers, and this time her whisper carries not defeat but triumph. As they embrace in the kitchen filled with the lingering aromas of their successful feast, Grace realizes that her old words have transformed completely. Where she once said, "No one loves a fat girl, sir, but I can cook," she now understands a deeper truth. Love sees beyond appearances to the heart beneath, and her cooking was never just about food, but about the care, strength, and nourishment she brings to everyone around her. The ranch flourishes under their partnership, becoming not just a successful operation but a gathering place where the community comes together, united by Grace's meals and the love story that proved prejudice wrong. Grace Thompson, once ashamed of her reflection, now stands proud as a woman who knows her worth and has taught an entire town to see beyond the surface. Her journey from whispered shame to confident joy proves that transformation comes not from changing who we are, but from embracing our true selves and finding those who see our real value. Sometimes the very qualities the world tells us to hide become our greatest strengths. What story of transformation are you carrying within you? Share in the comments how you've overcome others' expectations to find your own strength. Your story might inspire someone else to find their courage.